The terminal buzzed with the usual pre-flight chaos, muffled announcements, rolling suitcases, and irritated passengers waiting to board. Near gate 27, the atmosphere shifted sharply as a loud thud cut through the noise. Gasps erupted when a uniformed gate agent shoved a well-dressed black woman into the metal detector with unnecessary force, her shoulder slamming hard against the cold frame. She staggered back, clutching her arm, her expression a mix of disbelief and quiet fury. "I said step back." The gate agent barked, voice laced with contempt and authority, eyes narrowing as if he'd just apprehended a threat. But there was no threat. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't resisted. All she'd done was walk forward when she was told she could proceed, just like everyone else. A small crowd began to gather. Phones came out. A child clung to her mother's arm, whispering, "Why is he hurting that lady?" An elderly couple exchanged disapproving glances, while a young man nearby muttered, "She didn't do anything, but the gate agent didn't notice or didn't care." He stood tall, puffed up with self-righteousness. "You people think you can do whatever you want," he sneered, not even hiding the venom in his tone. The woman adjusted her blazer, eyes cool and steady now. She didn't raise her voice, didn't plead. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and said with chilling calm, "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." The gate agent let out a scoff. "Oh yeah? And who exactly are you supposed to be?" he snapped. Her answer was as simple as it was devastating. "You'll find out in 5 minutes." The gate agent laughed. Passengers murmured, intrigued. Some began recording more aggressively. But one woman near the back, her eyes wide, phone already Googling, froze mid-scroll. Her mouth fell open. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's her." The scene held its breath. 24 hours earlier, the sun beamed through the tinted windows of a sleek black SUV as it pulled up to the curb outside Terminal 3 of Atlanta International Airport. The driver stepped out swiftly, opening the rear door with the kind of precision only decades of service could refine. Out stepped a poised black woman in her mid-40s, wearing a deep navy blue pantsuit tailored to perfection, accented by a silver brooch shaped like wings, a subtle nod to her world. Her walk was graceful, deliberate, and confident, though her demeanor remained understated. She wasn't here to draw attention, just to catch a flight, like everyone else. But there was an aura about her, one that suggested power without arrogance, strength without noise. Rolling a single carry-on behind her, she passed through the sliding doors and into the bustle of the terminal. A few heads turned, some admiring, some curious, but most looked past her. A group of young men in business casual attire scoffed quietly as she passed, one whispering, "She's probably headed to economy, dressed up like she's something special." Another laughed, adding, "She probably works here." She heard it, of course. She'd heard it all her life. But she kept walking. At the check-in kiosk, she entered her confirmation number. First class, Atlantic Air Flight 189 to New York, the screen flashed. As she retrieved her boarding pass, an older, white woman approached the counter beside her, watching the screen out of the corner of her eye. "First class," she repeated aloud, raising a brow. "Good for you," she said, but her tone dripped with condescension. The woman's CEO in disguise offered a soft, polite smile, saying nothing. She had long learned that silence was often louder than words. As she made her way towards security, she passed a framed wall of photos of Atlantic Air's executive board. One of the janitors glanced up from mopping and did a double take. His eyes widened as he recognized her from the top center frame. But before he could speak, she put a gentle finger to her lips and winked. "Not today," she whispered. She moved forward, unaware, or perhaps perfectly aware, of what was waiting for her at the security gate and who was about to make a life-changing mistake. As she approached the security checkpoint, the CEO retrieved her ID and boarding pass, placing them in the tray with practiced ease. The TSA agent at the podium glanced at them briefly and nodded her through. But just as she was about to walk forward, a voice cut through the hum of the terminal, sharp, commanding, and dripping with attitude. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm going to need you to step aside." She turned to see a tall, square-jawed gate agent striding toward her with a sense of inflated authority. His badge read W. Carson, and his eyes scanned her not with curiosity, but with suspicion. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for her ID again, inspecting it as if he expected it to be fake. "This says first class," he muttered, frowning. "You sure that's correct?" She raised an eyebrow, her voice even. "I'm very sure." "Yeah, well," he said, stepping closer, "you're gonna have to go through secondary screening. Random check." He emphasized the words with a mocking smile. A nearby traveler, an elderly white man who had just breezed through the same lane, stopped and turned. "She didn't beep or anything," he said aloud. "I just walked through that same scanner with my belt still on." But the gate agent ignored him. "Ma'am," he repeated, stepped to the side. Reluctantly, the woman complied. She knew this routine. It wasn't new. But something about this agent was different. His tone wasn't just firm, it was cruel, aggressive, almost eager to assert dominance. He waved over a younger female employee who looked uncomfortable but obeyed. The agent watched like a hawk as the woman was asked to remove her shoes, blazer, and jewelry, then ordered to step into a manual scanner. "Is this really necessary?" she asked quietly. He grinned. "Absolutely. Gotta keep everyone safe." From the corner of her eye, she could see a few people beginning to record with their phones. Others whispered. She remained calm, composed. Her eyes didn't waver, but inside, something started to simmer. As the pat-down ended, the gate agent leaned in and said under his breath, "You people always think you're above the rules." That was the last straw. She turned to face him fully, meeting his smug expression with a look that could shatter steel. "You have no idea who you're talking to," she said. The tension at the checkpoint thickened like fog. Passengers nearby had slowed their steps, drawn in by the unmistakable friction. The gate agent, W. Carson, smirked as if he had already won some unspoken battle, puffing his chest as the woman stood calmly before him. Her belongings sat untouched in the bin beside the conveyor belt. She extended her hand politely to retrieve them, but Carson abruptly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "I didn't say we were done," he snapped, loud enough for heads to turn. Her voice stayed even. "You've scanned me. I've complied with every request. There's no reason to keep me here." Carson's face hardened. "You're not cleared to go until I say so. Take another step, and I'll consider it noncompliance." A hush fell over the area. The security staff at the far end glanced over, clearly uncomfortable. One officer whispered to another, "Isn't she someone important?" But Carson didn't notice or didn't care. He was on a power trip, and this moment was feeding his ego. "Step through the detector again," he ordered. "Slower this time." She gave him a look measured and icy before complying without a word. But as she passed through, he suddenly reached out and shoved her shoulder. The crowd gasped, her body lurched into the metal frame, the clang of impact ringing out across the terminal. A woman screamed. A child nearby started crying. Phones were fully raised now, filming from every angle. "Hey," someone shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" The woman caught herself, steadying her balance. She turned slowly, the pain in her shoulder evident, but her eyes were sharp, diamond-edged. She stood tall, despite the bruise forming beneath her blazer. Carson opened his mouth to justify his action, but she cut him off. "You're done," she said simply. "Get your supervisor." He laughed, a shallow, nervous sound. "You don't get to make demands. You're just—" But before he could finish, a loud voice from behind barked, "Stand down, Carson." Everyone turned. A senior airport official was approaching in a full sprint, flanked by two uniformed officers. The official's face was ashen. "Oh God," he muttered. "What have you done?" Carson blinked. "I was just doing my job. That's the CEO of the airline." The official hissed. "You assaulted the CEO." A stunned silence gripped the terminal. Passengers stood frozen, phones trembling in their hands, some barely breathing. Carson's smirk vanished like a snapped wire. He took a small step back, eyes darting between the woman and the approaching official. "CEO? What are you talking about?" he asked, voice faltering now. The senior official, red-faced, and breathless, pointed at the woman with reverence, like someone pointing at royalty. That's Ava R. Collins. She's the president and chief executive officer of Atlantic Air. His words echoed through the terminal like a thunderclap. A murmur rippled across the crowd. Someone gasped. A teenage girl whispered to her mom, "She's the woman from the Forbes cover." Another whispered, "Wait, the founder? That Ava Collins." Carson stammered, still in denial. This can't be real." He held it up again, hand trembling now. Ava took a slow step forward, her voice calm but cutting like steel through velvet. "You questioned my seat. You profiled me. You ignored protocol, used unnecessary force, and humiliated me in public. And now you're questioning my identity again." Her gaze bore into him with silent power. Carson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek, embossed black badge, flicking it open. It gleamed in the overhead light, Atlantic Air's executive emblem etched in silver, surrounded by her full name, title, and clearance level. "This badge," she said, holding it up so the cameras could see, "grants me unrestricted access to every airport, every gate, every hangar that this airline touches because I built it. From scratch." There was no anger in her tone, only truth and authority. The teenage girl with the phone whispered, awestruck, "She's a literal boss." Behind Ava, the security guards who had once watched silently now straightened up. One saluted quietly. The other lowered his head in shame. Carson, meanwhile, looked like he might faint. "I suggest," Ava said, folding the badge back into her pocket with precise elegance, "you step away now and let your superiors do what they need to do before this gets even worse." The gate agent stumbled back, face drained of color. And just like that, the power dynamic flipped, entirely irreversibly. Whispers turned into full-blown chatter. The crowd that had gathered was no longer just watching, they were reacting. Several people stared down at their phones, typing furiously or scrolling through search results. Within seconds, someone shouted from the back, "She's trending. It's her, Ava Collins." Another man held up a screen, a glossy photo of Ava on the cover of Fortune under the headline, "The Woman Who Changed Aviation." The gate agent, Carson, stood motionless, jaw slightly open. His earlier bravado had crumbled into visible panic. He looked around as if searching for a way out, but there was none. A woman in business attire walked up slowly from first-class line, phone in hand, and without a word turned her screen toward him. It displayed Ava's LinkedIn profile, verified, detailed, and damning. More passengers were chiming in now. "Wait, she's the youngest black woman to lead a major airline. She's on the President's Transportation Council. My niece interned for her." The energy in the terminal had shifted. Where there had been silence and doubt, now there was outrage, admiration, even awe. A young black woman near the front began to cry softly, brushing tears from her cheeks. "She's the reason I chose aviation," she whispered, looking at Ava like she was witnessing history. Ava, still poised, gave the young woman a small, reassuring nod. It was barely a gesture, but it spoke volumes. "I see you. I remember where I came from." Carson tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I didn't know who you were." Ava didn't flinch. "That's the problem," she replied. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with basic human decency." The official from earlier stepped forward, trying to salvage what little dignity the airline had left in this moment. "Ms. Collins, CEO Collins, please let us take you to the executive lounge. We deeply regret," but she raised a hand to stop him. "No," she said firmly. "This needs to happen right here, in front of everyone." Then she turned to the still filming crowd and looked straight into one of the phone cameras. "I want everyone watching to remember this moment, not because I'm the CEO, but because next time it could be someone without power, and they deserve to be treated with the same respect." Gasps echoed again, not from shock, but from the kind of truth that slices through complacency. Within minutes, the ripple effect of Ava Collins' identity shot through the airport like lightning. Word reached every terminal, security channel, and office suite above. A high-ranking Atlantic Air regional director appeared, power walking from the executive elevator, flanked by three senior staffers and two public relations officers. Their faces were tight with anxiety. They knew this moment could either crush or redeem the airline's public image. Miss Collins, the director began, slightly out of breath as he approached, "We are sincerely sorry for this unacceptable incident. We're mobilizing crisis management now. Please, let us escort you to a more private area." But Ava didn't move. "No," she said again, calmly but with an authority that demanded obedience. "The apology doesn't belong behind closed doors. It belongs out here where I was disrespected." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several people applauded quietly, a few with tears in their eyes. Ava turned to the staffers behind the director. "Where's your head of security?" A woman in a dark gray suit stepped forward nervously. "I'm here, ma'am." "Good," Ava said. "Is this man," she pointed directly at Carson, "still employed?" The security lead hesitated, glancing at the director. Ava didn't blink. "I asked you a question." The woman stiffened. "No, ma'am. He has been relieved of duty pending formal termination and investigation. Effective immediately." Carson let out a breathless, "Wait, what?" But it was too late. Two officers gently guided him away, not with force, but with finality. Ava turned to the others. "I expect a full report on all security staff trained under his supervision. I want racial bias audits, corrective retraining, and department reviews conducted before the end of the quarter." "Yes, ma'am." The director nodded quickly. She wasn't yelling. She didn't have to. Her words carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had earned the right to command and had no intention of letting this moment slip into corporate damage control. This wasn't about saving face. It was about setting a precedent. One of the younger public relations officers whispered, "She's rewriting the playbook live." Ava looked back at the terminal filled with people, those who had watched her dignity be tested and her power revealed. Then she said simply, "This airline will never again humiliate a black traveler under my leadership. Not one." The terminal was silent, almost reverent, as Ava Collins stood at the center of it all, composed yet resolute. Every passenger, every employee, every bystander with a phone in hand could feel it. This was no ordinary corporate apology moment. This was justice, measured, public, and impossible to ignore. Ava slowly turned toward the row of security personnel standing at attention along the wall. Some looked ashamed. Others looked nervous. A few looked like they'd finally seen a leader worth following. Her voice rang clear. "I want every employee who stood by and watched this happen to reflect on something," she said. "You don't need a title to do the right thing. You need courage. And if that's missing, you don't belong in this company." One of the supervisors stepped forward, visibly shaken. "Ma'am, I didn't know how to intervene," Ava nodded slowly. "Then you'll be retrained. And if you're unwilling to learn, you'll be replaced. That's not a threat. It's a promise to our customers and to every woman who looks like me and walks through these doors." Carson was still within earshot, seated on a bench now, wrists clasped and eyes wide. The magnitude of what had just happened was beginning to settle in. Ava glanced at him once, only once. "Security," she said calmly, "I want a formal Nori hire tag placed on his record. I don't care if it's Atlantic Air, another airline, or the snack cart on runway B. I don't want him wearing any uniform that represents service." A stunned silence. The regional director cleared his throat, nodding, "Understood, CEO Collins." Then she turned to the press officer standing by with a clipboard, trying to hide behind a pillar. "Get the media team ready. There will be a statement, but I don't want PR spin, I want truth. Include the footage. Every angle. Let the public decide who we are." People started clapping, first softly, then louder. Not the kind of applause for a celebrity, but for someone who just made a stand most wouldn't dare take. A nearby woman whispered through tears. She didn't just fire him, she rewrote the rules. And as Ava finally gathered her belongings from the security tray, calm, centered, powerful, The applause followed her all the way to the executive lounge. By the time Ava Collins reached the executive lounge, the world was already watching. The incident, captured from no less than 8 different camera angles, had exploded across social media platforms. The hashtags #AvaCollins, #FlyingWhileBlack, and #Airline CEO trended within the hour. News outlets scrambled to verify the footage, only to realize the truth was more powerful than fiction. Clips of the confrontation aired on every major network before nightfall. Not just the shove or the revelation, but the entire arc, the calm authority with which Ava carried herself, the unapologetic way she held the gate agent accountable, and the deep grace with which she defended dignity, not just her own, but everyone's. On Twitter, one user posted, "She didn't just expose racism, she exposed what leadership really looks like." Another wrote, "Ava Collins didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard." Corporate executives weighed in. Activists praised her. Civil rights organizations called the airline's rapid accountability a blueprint for modern corporate justice. Meanwhile, customers, especially Black and brown travelers, shared stories of their own airport humiliations, with Ava's moment acting as a rallying cry. But beyond the headlines and think pieces, something deeper stirred. In a quiet suburb outside of Detroit, a little Black girl named Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the footage on her mom's tablet. Her eyes widened as Ava Collins, tall and elegant, spoke firmly into a phone camera, declaring that respect wasn't optional. "Mommy," Zoe whispered, "she looks like me." Her mother nodded, tears welling up. "And one day, baby, you can be just like her." At a flight school in Texas, a group of young women reviewed Ava's story in their diversity training seminar. One Latina student turned to her friend and said, This makes me want to fly for her airline." It wasn't just the public reacting, it was the future reshaping itself. In corporate boardrooms, policies were being rewritten. In homes, daughters and sons saw leadership in a new light. And in thousands of hearts across the country, a powerful seed had been planted. 2 days later, Ava Collins stood at a podium beneath the Atlantic Air emblem, facing a sea of reporters, flashing cameras, and millions watching the live broadcast from around the country. The press conference had been announced that morning. No pre-scripted statements, no filtered interviews. Just Ava. Her words. She stepped forward in a crisp gray blazer and silver pin. Simple, powerful. Her presence alone silenced the room. "I never intended to become the headline," she began. "I intended to board a plane. Quietly. Like anyone else." A hush blanketed the space. Every eye was on her. What happened to me was not just about one employee. It was about a mindset, a system, that assumes power belongs to a certain look, a certain gender, a certain color. And when someone doesn't fit that expectation, they're treated with suspicion or worse. She paused, letting that truth settle in the air. I was fortunate. I had a title, a platform, a voice people would eventually listen to. But what about the people who don't? What about the young mother traveling with her baby, the student rushing to a scholarship interview, the father on his way to a funeral? What happens when they're told they don't belong? When their dignity is crushed and no one is watching? A few reporters lowered their pens, visibly moved. Ava's voice didn't waver. If anything, it deepened with purpose. Let me be very clear, this is not just about racism in an airport. It's about the way we see each other. It's about the unchecked assumptions that strip people of their humanity. It's about leadership, not when it's convenient, but when it's necessary. She glanced to the side where several Atlantic Air executives stood, nervous but supportive. "This company is changing," she said, "because I demand it, because our customers deserve it, and because we have the power to make sure no one is ever made to feel small under our roof again." The final sentence came slow and firm. Justice is not a moment. It's a standard. And with that, Ava Collins stepped down from the podium. Not as a victim, not as a CEO making headlines, but as a woman who had redrawn the lines of leadership permanently. Weeks passed, but the echoes of Ava Collins' stand didn't fade. Instead, they rippled outward into boardrooms, classrooms, and communities far beyond the walls of Atlantic Air. At the airport where it all happened, a new wall display was unveiled. Voices That Lift Us, a tribute to leaders who reshaped the skies. At its center was a powerful portrait of Ava, mid-speech, hand raised not in anger but in resolve. The plaque beneath it read, "Leadership is not position. It is action rooted in dignity." Every day, travelers stopped to take photos. Children pointed at her image. Employees, old and new, passed by with a quiet sense of pride and accountability. Inside Atlantic Air, mandatory anti-bias training was no longer a checkbox, but a multi-week program integrated into company culture. A new department for inclusion and passenger advocacy was formed. Its first hire, a young black woman named Tasha, the same one who had cried when she recognized Ava in the terminal. Now she stood proudly in her new office, her ID badge clipped just below a framed photo of Ava Collins with the words, "You belong here." And it wasn't just the airline. University business programs started using the incident in ethics case studies. The footage was shown at civil rights summits. Leaders across industries, tech, healthcare, even law enforcement quoted Ava's line, "Justice is not a moment, it's a standard." In a modest home in Chicago, Zoe, the little girl who once whispered, "She looks like me," now had a poster of Ava Collins above her bed. Her mother noticed she stood a little taller when she walked into school. A dream had been planted, and it was growing. Because while the world didn't change overnight, something did shift. Someone somewhere stood a little stronger, spoke up a little louder, believed they belonged just a little more. And all because one woman, shoved into a metal detector, chose not to stay silent, but to rise. As the camera pans through the bustling terminal one last time, it lingers on the framed portrait of Ava Collins. No spotlight, no ceremony, just quiet reverence. Below it, a child stands holding her mother's hand, staring up in awe. Somewhere nearby, a voice announces a boarding call. Life continues, but something is different now. We hear Ava's voice, her real voice, echoing from that press conference. Justice is not a moment. It's a standard. Cut to Ava walking through another airport months later, unnoticed this time. No extra screening. No second glances. Just a traveler among many, dignified and at peace. A gate agent smiles and says, "Have a great flight, Miss Collins." She nods, appreciative but not surprised. As she boards, a nearby staff member whispers to another, "That's the woman who changed everything." The screen fades to black with the final line written in bold. They tried to humiliate her. Instead, she redefined what leadership looks like.